Okay, Gordon, so we're going to talk about peat now.
Right.
So obviously very important in the process. Quite a few different areas where you can get peat in Scotland. So does it really matter what peat you use at your distillery?
Yes, I would. It's short and sharp.
Short. Good answer.
It does. Lots to do with scale.
Mm.
If you're making hundreds of thousands of casks worth of whiskey, you're going to have to take peat from different sources. And in the blending process afterwards, the differences between different peat sources aren't going to make a big difference. Right. If you're a smaller, bespoke, single malt distillery, then where you get your peat from is going to make a difference to your whiskey. I don't want to exaggerate how big that difference is, because it's like every difference that you make between a distillery, it will have a small difference. Right. And it's the additive effect of all these differences that end up with the Scotch whisky character from that particular distillery. But I don't think it's not going to be a big lever, but there are no big levers in Scotch whisky flavour, but it is one of these differentiating points that will have an effect on the flavour. There are only a certain number of peat bogs in Scotland that are actually harvested for whisky manufacture, and they do have a different character, but I think we can overemphasise what.
Okay, so let me ask you, for example, the very smoky whiskies, peaty whiskies coming from Islay, they use peat. Up on Orkney, we've got Highland Park that uses peat. So is it essential for Highland Park to have a Orkney peat and Lagavulin and Laphroaig to have Islay peat?
That's a difficult question. I would say yes. That doesn't mean it has to use it all the time, because you've got blending and you've got different ages. Of course, the biggest driver in peat flavour is just how much you use in the malting process. That overrides huge amounts of these differences. Plus, within the recipe itself, you can get differences of peat flavour depending on how, particularly during fermentation, how long your fermentation is, particularly during your cuts, how your cuts are, and that can stretch out the flavours, change it from sort of like a Laphroaig peatedness, which is in your face, very smoky, to say an Ardbeg, which is much more pulled out, much more sweeter peated flavours with much more complexity, I would say.
So maybe it's a sort of provenance terroir thing, is it, that some people might do?
Yes, I think there is a terroir to do with that, to do with peat. But I would repeat, and I think it's very important, I think it's not a major driver. Okay. What do you think?
I would agree with you. Knowing that some Islay whiskies sometimes are made with mainland peat, not a lot, but you say peat bogs are limited and you have to use different sources. So I think it's important, as everything's important, but in terms of peatiness, smokiness, types of profile you're going to get, probably the amount of peat where you take your spirit cut is going to have a bit more impact than specifically where that peat's from. I mean, you've done quite a lot of work at the SWRI.
Yes, we really looked at that, and we did find differences depending on where the peat was brought from in the spirit, not just in the chemical makeup, but remember that was a trained sensory panel that was picking those differences up.
That's
true. Now, I think that's important because I think it's building up the complexity of that flavour. Yes. So it's as important as everything else is important.
Yes.
It's not the be-all and end-all, even within the peat flavour. For instance, a lot of people don't realise that some peat flavour comes from the cask itself.
Yes.
Because it's charred on the inside. What is peat? It's it's burnt woody material. What's the inside of a cask? It's burnt woody material. So you get some of the same congeners from that. And something like Glengoyne, for instance, which is famous for not using peated, will have a very slight peated score from a panel. Does the consumer pick that up? I think they pick up the quality. I think they pick up the complexity. They might not be able to pick up the individual flavour components like a trained panel can, but I think they get the overall quality, the overall complexity. And if we were to get rid of these differences between the distilleries, say we'll just get our peat from one source, then you're losing some of that complexity. You're beginning to lose some of that difference. Of course, you could do it, and it wouldn't make a lot of difference at first, but then I think that would
over time,
over time,
affect things,
and the mindset behind that is we can
just do whatever we want anywhere.
Would ruin it in the end. We'd get blander and blander spirits.
So we think there's differences in different peats, but not a huge impact in the overall scheme of things. In the final expression.
And that's true of most parts of the Scotch whisky making process. Like barley variety, still shape, how you organise the and manage the receivers, the cuts, the wood
they're
that
all
you choose.
impacting.
They're all impacting, and it's keeping those individual differences separate, not letting them all become the same. That keeps the different distilleries producing different flavours of whisky, and keeps that diversity of whisky, which we need for the blending process.
Good. Sorted that one out as well.
Sorted. Done.